following program is brought to you in conjunction with the folks at Grace to All with Paul Gray. Now we bring to you the Agape Guy Show with your host, Linn Manning.
I'm banking everything on love. I'm banking everything on love.
Hello and welcome to the Agape Guy Show. My name is Lenny and I'm your host. I've been a bit sick lately, so you might notice my voice is a little off kilter, but let's continue anyway. Today I'd like to look at an issue that I think people are only getting a partial view of these days. I'd like to take a bit of a more well-rounded view of this subject, so I'd like to reassess it a bit more. The subject I want to look at is what some people call church hurt, and I want a more complete view of it. I'd like to have a better view of what started it, and maybe look at how calling it church hurt can be a bit dismissive. I believe that the term in some ways is victim blaming and victim shaming. It also further abuses the victims of real spiritual abuse from church leaders. Yet the victims already suffered abuse from church leaders. It makes it seem like the victims only hold a petty grudge for a small petty disagreement. Yet in reality, it's usually people who leave churches due to severe and prolonged spiritual abuse from church leaders. As I've observed, it's rarely a minor disagreement, and rarely is it one small minor incident. I'd say the bigger problem is the abuse that comes from church leaders. I'm talking about severe verbal abuse, psychological manipulation, and even sexual abuse. In my opinion, people leaving churches for minor disagreements is fairly rare, and the bigger problem by far is abuse from church leaders. Harsh behavior from victims is fairly rare from my observation. It's also rare that a victim of spiritual abuse goes on to spiritually abuse other people. The bigger trend is that millions of people are leaving the church every year due to abusive church leaders. Yet the people who were abused aren't causing people to leave. I've never seen massive numbers in studies and statistics that show hurt people make other people leave church. So in my opinion, accusing hurt people of being the problem isn't quite accurate, and it's actually abusive or dismissive to the victims. Even if I'm wrong about this, then I'd like to ask where the proof is to prove me wrong, because I can't find it. There might be a lot of people who are upset about the rampant and almost pandemic amounts of spiritual abuse. Yet that doesn't mean all those people are wrong about saying there's real spiritual abuse. Some of them might say some harsh things on social media, but what they say is usually true. Now, perhaps people on both sides need to get to know God's love so it can heal them and temper their behavior. So, yes, maybe it does need to be tempered on both sides. Yet I still say that the bigger problem is abuse from church leaders, and I believe the studies and statistics back me up on that. Some people might accuse these hurt people of merely being bitter and holding grudges, but that misses the point. They were legitimately abused, and many people don't seem to want to acknowledge the initial abuse. Then if they acknowledge any of it, they seem to want to sweep it under the rug and cover it up, or not deal with it or address it. Nor do they want to seem to do anything to restrain the abusers from continuing to abuse other people. There are some victims of spiritual abuse who might say harsh things in social media groups about abusive church leaders. Yet from my observations, those complaints are often true. Yet complaining about the same thing year after year without any healing can be a bit rough, and it can eat you up inside. Only complaining can be short-sighted and never bring healing and never resolve the matter. I also believe that teaching these folks about God's love can go quite a ways to help them heal and forgive. That usually ends most negative comments on social media. Perhaps they might need help with learning good, healthy boundaries as well. Yet I think we also need to hold church leaders accountable as well. Then both the victim and the abuser might need to get counseling separately. The abuser also needs help to stop being abusive by dealing with the psychological issues that lead them to be abusive. Now let's get serious here for a moment. Do you know that in some parts of the United States, certain forms of abuse from clergy is illegal? Such as if a church leader is giving someone counseling and commits acts of physical intimacy with that person, it's illegal. That abusive clergy can go to jail for that. It's basically considered to be a non-consensual sexual assault or rape. You see, in Texas and Minnesota, clergy can be criminally prosecuted for sexual exploitation of church attendees. I've seen abuse in several churches, and the mind control techniques are the same as has been documented in cult groups. You can also go online to check with groups that give counseling to spiritual abuse victims. They will tell you that many churches engage in mind games that are nearly identical to those used by cult groups. If you don't believe me, you can look up those groups on the internet for yourself. Look up groups that give counseling to those who suffered from spiritual abuse. You might also want to read about these types of abuse in books that are meant to help abuse victims. Books like one of these in this list. 1. Healing Spiritual Abuse and Religious Addiction by Matthew Linn, Sheila Fabricant Linn, and Dennis Linn. 2. Recovery from Cults. Help for Victims of Psychological and Spiritual Abuse by Michael D. Langone. And number 3. Combating Cult Mind Control by Stephen Hassan. Those books can also help in the healing process of victims of spiritual abuse as well. You see, when people insinuate that victims of severe spiritual abuse are the problem, you victimize them again. You engage in victim blaming and victim shaming. Some of those victims might say some harsh things about the abusive church leaders, and perhaps rightly so. They might also get a bit overly harsh in some social media groups where the whole group says harsh things about abusive church leaders. Yet if there wasn't any spiritual abuse to begin with, 99% of those complaints wouldn't be happening. So, here on this show, I know that horrific abuse happens because I've seen it and experienced it as well. I don't want to counteract it with my own verbal abuse against those church leaders because that doesn't resolve the problem. It might point out the problem, but it doesn't resolve the problem. We should work to stop the abuse, but it can only truly be stopped when we teach people about God's love. We might also need to get them some counseling, then try to help those folks learn to live by God's love. I'm personally trying to help this because I know that many people don't really believe God is loving. They say God in His love needs to be counterbalanced by His anger, wrath, and justice. So I've tried to help by writing a book where I defend God's love and disprove the idea that it needs to be counterbalanced. My book's current working title is The In-Depth Truth About God's Love. I can also list a few other books that help a person learn what God's love is like and how to apply it to their life. I mean books like He Loves Me by Wayne Jacobson, Pluriform Love by Thomas J. Ord. I've also liked Classic Christianity by Bob George. I especially liked Chapter 11 where he mostly talked about God's love and how to apply it to your life. I can also definitively tell you that not all hurt people go around hurting other people. That's a mere cliche. Many hurt people heal, become more mature, and move on with their life. Some other people need a bit more help to heal. Yet to point the finger of blame at victims is abusive and it shows that you're just gaslighting them. So instead of pointing the finger of blame at victims, perhaps we need to help them heal and give them a kind-hearted word of encouragement. Now, I know sometimes church attendees can say some harsh things and needlessly complain sometimes. I've seen people act like a pastor is no good simply because his shoes weren't shined good enough. Maybe the pastor's suit wasn't nice enough. I've seen some people nitpick the sermons and nitpick about the grammar the preacher used when he was talking. I've also seen church attendees act like a preacher isn't any good because the sermon didn't align with their beloved pet doctrines quite good enough. I've also seen many unlearned church attendees believe in some really crazy and baseless Christian conspiracy theories. So sometimes attendees are ridiculous in their ideas, expectations, and Christian conspiracy theories. Then again, sometimes some preachers are unlearned too. Maybe they didn't go to a Christian college to take theology classes or learn about church history. So maybe the preacher believes in some unfounded and baseless Christian conspiracy theories as well. I wouldn't consider attendees' complaints about unshined shoes and bad grammar to be church hurt. That's simply excessive complaining about minor issues that don't matter worth a hill of beans, in my opinion. I'm currently working on writing my own theology course to help people avoid baseless Christian conspiracy theories. If you're interested in that theology course, just let me know. Now, let me tell you a bit more about my life and the spiritual abuse I experienced. Through the late 1980s to the early 2000s, I experienced spiritual abuse at several different church groups. I even warned some people at one church I attended about some other abusive church groups. I then encountered a lot of people who didn't believe me when I warned them. Yet there was a big conference for all of our sister churches in that fellowship of churches in that area. Many of those church groups gathered at that conference. A church leader and his wife, who had been abusive towards me, took that occasion to be abusive toward me again. Yet this time, a lot of other people witnessed the event. That night I had a dream where a glowing person walked up to me and spoke to me. The glowing person said, and I quote, "You sure were right about them," end quote. The glowing person was basically referring to those abusive church leaders. You can read about that in my book. A short time later, as I was practicing music with the music leader at the church I attended, he mentioned something. Here's the quote of what he said to me as best as I can recall. He said, quote, "We didn't believe you when you told us about that other pastor. Yet now that we've seen it with our own eyes, we can see that he's even worse than what you said. So we went and warned our friends at other churches and told them not to have anything to do with that guy's church." End quote. From what I understand, some people left that abusive preacher's church after that. A short time later, that pastor called me on the phone and yelled at me and kept repeating, "You ruined my ministry! You ruined my ministry!" Well, I calmly told him that he had destroyed it all on his own. I had learned about God's love, and it had helped my life, and I told him that he should surrender his life to God's love. He said he didn't believe in stuff like that, so I told him it had helped me tremendously. You see, I could only point him in the right direction. I couldn't force it on him. Yet that was pretty much the end of the call. To this day, that guy has never acknowledged his bad behavior or apologized for it. Neither has his deacons acknowledged it or apologized for it. They all initially told me I was wrong, and it was all only a small minor misunderstanding. Yet before I left that church, another 4 families had left. They later told me that they left for similar reasons. So I think 8 other adults is enough testimony to support my claims. Now, there are countless numbers of people with similar stories about things that happened to them in their church groups. Statistics also tell us that millions are leaving typical conventional church groups every year. Abuse is a big reason for it, too. The statistics used to be 1 million were leaving on every highly populated continent every year. So that's 6 million per year. I've heard a somewhat unsubstantiated claim that the numbers of losses in South America have either decreased or leveled out, yet many are still leaving in most other places around the world. Yet if millions are leaving, it likely means that many more are staying and suffering in silence. Others simply stay at their local church because they don't know what else to do or where else to go. They've been so heavily controlled that they don't know about anything else. Some people think their church is right, so they think they need to stay. Unfortunately, many people don't know enough about theology or how to study the Bible or how to spot spiritual abuse. Many people also think that if the preacher reads from the Bible, it must be right. Many people also think that if a few good-sounding songs are sung, then it must be the right place to be. So, unfortunately, many people don't know any better. They are often somewhat brainwashed by heavy-handed preachers into thinking they alone and their church alone is right. So people think they must stay at that church. Then again, many other people are tired of suffering, so they simply cannot stay. They sense the absolute necessity to leave and never go back. They sense that if they stay in the abusive situation that they will lose their sanity. Some people can see that their boundaries are never respected and that the abuse probably will not cease. I explain in my book how I lived through several abusive church situations like this. I also show how I eventually learned about God's love, and I show how it dramatically changed my life. I can also tell you that I've seen old videos of Jim Jones being abusive. I can honestly tell you that I've seen pastors that acted in ways that were eerily similar to Jim Jones. I can also tell you that a lot of the spiritual abuse from church leaders mostly came into play by the shepherding movement. That movement was started in the 70s. It was originally to help the many hippies who were getting saved during the so-called Jesus movement. That was during the late 60s and early 70s. It was originally started to help the hippies find churches and church leaders to help them learn about the Bible. They wanted church leaders to help the hippies learn to be good Christians. Yet the movement eventually adopted the idea that they needed to have a firm hand to help the anti-establishment hippies learn about the Bible. That gradually turned into trying to force the hippies to adapt to certain Christian doctrines and practices. That further devolved into church leaders trying to force the hippies to go along with their individual denominational doctrines. If the hippies didn't like the denominational doctrines, the church leaders were told to be even more forceful. This led many church leaders to act like dictators. Some people even believe that this led Jim Jones to do the things that he did. Sometime later in the 80s, a few Christians and church leaders and denominations realized that this was wrong. Some Christian denominations saw the problem and declared the shepherding movement to be a cult. Many groups tried to distance themselves from it after that. Yet many groups still have the same type of heavy-handed approach to church leadership. I can also say that this heavy-handed approach is unbiblical and directly contradicts Jesus' teachings. Jesus openly taught that none of his followers should act as lords over others or try to domineer over others. You can see this in the Bible in Matthew 20, verses 25 through 28, Mark 10, 42 through 45, Luke 22, verses 25 through 26, and it was repeated in one of Peter's letters in 1 Peter 5, verses 2 and 3. Now, I'd also say that almost every single church leadership model I've seen these days is unbiblical for that very reason. They all end up with people domineering over others. If you want to see a further explanation of that, you can find an episode of this show on YouTube, which is Season 1, Episode 11. If you'd like to learn more about the so-called shepherding movement, I'd like to recommend a book. The book isn't primarily about the shepherding movement, but it gives a lot of insight into it. The book is titled Post-Charismatic 2.0, Rekindle the Smoldering Wick, and it's by Robbie McAlpine. The book isn't anti-charismatic, it's just that he left behind some troublesome aspects of some of those types of groups. Now, there's an article that came out a few years ago in 2020, and it's got a lot of truth in it that needs to be heard. It's by Marianne Samrath. It's titled, Hurt People Do Not Hurt People. Unhealed People Do. I'll put a link on the screen and in the description below the video on YouTube. The article's on a website called Thought Catalog. Let me read a bit from the article and you can decide if it sounds reasonable and fairly truthful. Quote, hurt people do not hurt people because the truth is, we have all been hurt. No one is exempt from pain or suffering. No one has walked through life without hardship. No one is free from emotional scars. Adversity is the price of being human. How we cope with adversity will separate the unhealed from the healing. Hurt people do not hurt people. Unhealed people hurt people. Holding compassion for the unhealed does not mean we excuse toxicity. Holding compassion is to understand toxic behavior is rooted in avoiding inner work. An unhealed person projecting their pain onto us will be bitter, entitled, and envious. We must never take it personally because it comes from an unconscious place. If we find ourselves on their path of self-destruction, we must walk away. This experience will be incredibly painful if this person is someone we love. End quote. I think I'll stop quoting the article there and just leave it at that. I can also say that there are a few things that help me find healing in my life. Here's my list of those things that help me heal. 1. Learning about God's love and surrendering myself to it. 2. I got counseling because I was depressed from all the verbal abuse from acquaintances who didn't believe in God's love. Yet the counseling helped a lot, and the counselor recommended the Boundaries book. So that leads me to my next point. Number 3, I went through the Boundaries book to learn about good, healthy boundaries. That helped me quite a bit as well. That book is by Dr. Townsend and Dr. Cloud. Number 4, learning about God's goodness helped a lot as well. The best teaching I've found on that subject is on Richard Murray's website called thegoodnessofgod.com. Click on the button for his audio teachings and listen to those audio teachings. It sure helped me a lot. Number 5, those books I mentioned about spiritual abuse helped a lot as well. I'll put that list back on the screen right now. Learning about God's goodness also brought me to learn other things that same year in 2017 when I heard about it. I ended up learning why people have doubts about doctrines of eternal conscious torment and hell. I also learned about a good apologetic defense for universal reconciliation. Some of those studies led me to realize that I had been wrong about some big issues when I was a young man. I was a young guy with a head full of theology and apologetics, and I thought I was right about everything. I believed that I had an apologetic defense for everything I believed. I could even point out mistakes that theologians made in their books and speeches that they made. Then I started seeing spiritual abuse in several different church groups. That led me to have what I would consider to be several existential crises. I'd say that 2 of those existential crises were really big and drastically life-altering. The first one was where I was seeing God as loving and that He didn't want us to live by works. The second one was about the hell issue. I also used to make fun of people who believed in God's love. I thought God's love must be balanced by His anger, wrath, and justice. I thought people who believed in God's love were either on hard drugs, were crazy, or were cultists who believed in weird stuff. Then I left some churches and eventually met some people who told me about God's love and defended it quite well. That shocked me. Yet they had also seen a lot of stuff that I had noticed about other Christians living by works. Those two things made me want to learn more from those folks. Then, once I surrendered my life to God's love, it dramatically changed my life. The people who taught me about God's love said it changed my life so much that it seemed like I wasn't even the same person anymore. I went from being a smart aleck know-it-all who was a religious snob that talked down to everybody to being a very kind-hearted and humble guy. Then I was shocked when I sensed God leading me away from conventional churches altogether, and I read a lot about house churches and organic church. A lot of those books were very eye-opening as well. I was even more shocked when I read the book Hope Beyond Hell. That book gave lots of reasons to doubt the traditional views of hell. That led to a big existential crisis that was quite severe for me. I started trembling all the time and was nauseous all day, every day for 2 weeks straight after that. I was nauseous because I could barely believe I had been so wrong for so many years. I was also scared because I knew my family would probably act like they hated me and shun me if they knew what I believed about that stuff. Then I realized it all pointed to God's love, and I then calmed down a bit. So that's why I encourage everyone to learn about God's love. It was really the only thing that helped me in my life. So remember what Corrie ten Boom used to say, "There's no pit so deep that God's love is not deeper still." She said that after surviving a World War II concentration camp. So I'm quite sure that God's love can do amazing things. So on that note, I'll just say I hope to see you in the next episode of the Agape Guy Show. Goodbye for now.
I'm banking everything on love. I'm banking everything on love. I see the flags unfurl and they're blowing the other way. I see the anchor rising and the ship moves